get to hear from Mayor Bowser, but also the formidable Angela Rye. Now, Angela was born in Seattle, Washington, but she had the brilliance to make Washington, D.C. her home. Many of you know her from her frequent appearances on CNN and NPR, and for her role as Executive Director and General Counsel to the Congressional Black Caucus for the 112th Congress. And she also serves on the board of Congressional Black Caucus Political Action Committee, for which I'm very involved. She's the principal and CEO of Impact Strategies, a political advocacy firm located right here in the nation's capital. Angela also received recently an honorary doctorate from Raleigh College. Congratulations, Angela. Dr. Rye. Her work has been featured in several publications and outlets from Marie Claire to Ebony to the Washington Post. Her interest in her work in cannabis brings her into this discussion with the mayor today. Please join me in bringing both of these brilliant ladies to our forum. And Angela, I think you're going to kick it off, aren't you?
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I know that we just heard that you were, you pushed cannabis from your very first term here. So I have to ask if you're a cannabis connoisseur yourself. And if so, can you just say inhale or edible? You can say inhale or edible. And I'll even allow CBD oil.
I'll just say, we have a legal regime here in the District of Columbia.
Oh, come on!
That's my answer, and I'm sticking to it.
I know you're not known to be a pushover. I'm not one either. I may revisit that.
Okay.
So speaking of your advocacy in this space, you have a history in your administration with cannabis, and I want to just start there. What is that history? I know where we are right now, but if we can give this room a sense of where you've been and where you're going.
Well, let me start with Initiative 71 because I think that is most closely tied to what we're talking about today. In 2014, residents of the District of Columbia went to the ballot box and voted for the legal possession and consumption of marijuana for adults, called Initiative 71. And actually, I think it was more than 71% of people voted for the legal possession of small amounts of marijuana and consumption by adults. There was a strong recognition in the city that adults could choose to use cannabis and choose to use it safely, and that we were incarcerating too many people for what everybody was agreeing were very minor infractions of possessing small amounts of marijuana. The problem that we have is unique to us in the district because we have a Congress that can impose its will on some of our laws. So there was one congressman from Maryland who decided that he knew better than the voters of the district about a local law, and that was the possession and use of marijuana by adults that Initiative 71 allowed. So there were a lot of threats wielded against us, nasty letters and requests from the committee and the like. But we, with our Congresswoman, made sure that we were right in the law, and we proceeded to allow for the law to go into effect. So what, in some ways, it actually did was supercharge the underground market because you had a lot of demand and nowhere to legally purchase it. And we know what will happen in that case. The underground market would take over. And so we have been working ever since about how to have a regulated, safe market for adult use in DC.
So when you talk about you had an incarceration problem, are there still people incarcerated right now for marijuana offenses?
I would imagine that there are for the sale of marijuana and probably significant trafficking crimes, but I would have to be more, I would have to know a little bit more about that. Now, what our bill does, we introduced this bill earlier in the year that, you know, just really forges a new path for regulation, recreational regulation in the district.
This is Safe Cannabis Sales Act, or, okay.
That's the Safe Cannabis Sales Act. And we look at those offenses and rolling back people who are incarcerated for those offenses. We already have a piece of legislation in front of our council about expungement of records, which is critically important. So our bill is really about safety. How do people know what they're buying and using? Safety in another way, because we know underground markets create violence in our communities. And it's also about making the law clear for people. So you know, if you live here and you're visiting here, you know what is legal for you, but also dealing with the past incarceration problem and dealing with how we make sure that communities that have been impacted can be part of a new legal regime.
Have you offered any guidance to the police department about whether or not they can arrest people now? I know that they have their possession amounts that people have, but is there some type of easing of, this is something that shouldn't even be actionable anymore because of the direction we're trying to go in with the Safe Cannabis Sales Act?
That is pretty much the case. I don't think we're making any arrests for possession. I know there's no prosecution happening for possession of small amounts. But we still have sales, and we have a sales problem, and we have a violence related to sales problem because there's so much cash that is involved in some of this marijuana business.
When you consider just the percentage roughly of arrests for sales right now, do you have a rough estimate of the overall percentage of arrests? And I think this is important, right? Because all of us, our point of personal privilege today is we could afford to be in this room. We have some type of access to information that allows us to be in this room to prep for when the Safe Cannabis Sales Act passes, but there are other folks who, you know, it could just be ignorance of the law. We know it's no defense, but nonetheless it's ignorance of the law or trying to provide for their families or whatever, who still very well may be experiencing the criminal justice system in this way that in 5 seconds, right, it's not gonna matter anymore.
Right, and I don't know what the percentage is, but we do know that we have an active underground market. And sadly, we do have a lot of, you know, we think of kind of street corner sales, but we have more illegal sales happening in storefronts, pop-up houses, where there's a lot of cash being exchanged, which makes it very dangerous for people who think they're being entrepreneurs. It makes it dangerous for the patrons. It makes it dangerous for people who are providing security, some of whom have been in very precarious situations. So it is part of why we have Safe Cannabis is to promote public safety in our communities.
Mm-hmm. And so you talked a little bit about Initiative 71, which allows for recreational possession.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just hit on sales, which is a really important point. We've heard panel discussions all day talking about the multi-billion-dollar industry that we expect for this to be. When you consider the opportunities for the entrepreneurs, although you don't want them to be entrepreneurs right now, but the opportunities for entrepreneurs in this particular space and for people who have lived here a long time, it's not Chocolate City as much. I feel like now it's kind of getting butterscotch. We'll call it mocha. I'm gonna call it marigold in a second, but either way, I think what we know is that we're not necessarily on the benefiting side of this industry. All over the country, you're talking about less than 1%. What types of safeguards have you all put in effect in the Safe Cannabis Sales Act, and or what are you willing to do?
I think what we have looked at what has worked for us so far in our regulated medical marijuana space. And I was on the council, and Councilmember Yvette Alexander is here, also in the room, part of a council that made the rules for medical marijuana. And our approach then was to be measured and to go out into communities, to let them know that this is a real business and it's not something that they have to fear. That these cultivation centers are places where we're going to hire DC residents, where there's science involved and where there's a career path involved. And the staff are knowledgeable to suggest to them how the cannabis can be used to help a myriad of issues. So we went into our medical regime in a very measured way. We had limits, for example, on how many businesses could be in each ward. And that was largely to let residents know how it would work, that it wouldn't overtake their neighborhoods. And in fact, in some ways, it could enhance a neighborhood. And so that is how we would approach going into a recreational regulation as well. And we do contemplate favoring our local businesses and favoring businesses that have been a part of the success of our medical marijuana program.
So the medical marijuana, somebody is very happy about that. You can feel free to clap. Ma'am, sir, distinguished guest, feel free. You mentioned the medical dispensaries. What percentage of the existing medical dispensaries are owned by African American residents?
Ooh, I would have to ask the trade association, probably half?
50%.
I would say 50%.
So would your expectation be, because that's a great one.
It's fantastic.
50, yeah, it is. It really, really is. Like, y'all feel flat for that. And this scenario recreational use that the dispensaries, the cultivators, other folks where there are business opportunities should also be 50% black.
I think that we would look at our existing kind of CBE programs and local hiring and business use programs. And I think that we have a number in here at 60% local goal or local requirement in state cannabis.
Mm-hmm. And right now the demographic, at least for the last census reported, maybe lower now, is about 47% black owned. So that means that, again, it's not the folks who were here during the war on drugs. So I think I'm kind of just pushing on what we consider equity. For example, in the Safe Cannabis Sales Act, you all say that you want the revenue from the sales to benefit these communities, which is an amazing goal, and it should happen. Mm-hmm. But also when we start talking about ownership and how we change the makeup and the economic empowerment opportunities for the very black folks who got locked up for this because of the war on drugs, which you were too young to have anything to do with, but you've seen it happen, right? Communities have been ravaged for years. Our families have been torn apart by this.
No, I've lived, I'm born and raised in Washington, D.C., and I have seen the ravages of the war on drugs, seeing what it's done to communities and families who still struggle because they have absent mother or father, or who's incarcerated or no longer here. And so the war on drugs has been devastating to us. And I think when we look at what we can do with cannabis sales, we certainly want to empower our business owners, and we want our business owners to be getting ready for the opportunity. So there's a lot that we can do with legislation, and there's a lot that the private sector has to do to make sure that they're ready for these opportunities, and that's key. As for people who are formerly incarcerated and are have an interest in getting in the business, I think that we have to work with our businesses to figure out what types of training opportunities will be available for them and to them in the whole spectrum of jobs that are available in the industry. And I think that we have some work to do on that, quite frankly, because I think there's a sense, it's not just an easy conversion of saying you've been affected, you may have been incarcerated, now what do you want to do in the business? And it is not a small thing to say that we can be very focused in our investments in communities that have been ravaged. We know, for example, when someone is coming home from prison, one of the most key things that they need is safe housing. And if we can invest from this program into making sure that more people have safe housing, we've done a long way in bringing that family member back to his family. So I think that we can be very intentional about how we make those investments. We also know that many of our men coming home are interested in entrepreneurship. And it may be the best thing for them to do instead of fighting to get into traditional 9-to-5 type employment. That focusing, and we have invested in programs like that. One has been successful for us called Aspire, how we can work with people on their business ideas and actualize them. And I think a new industry in cannabis gives us another way to focus that energy.
And on, I think in that same lane, whether it's the tax revenue from the sales or some other kind of set aside funding, we know too from the models that exist in places where recreational marijuana is already legal, that standing up a dispensary alone can cost over $700,000.
Yeah.
And so that's the other issue. So we're saying we want residents to participate in this way,
Right.
but if your barrier is one that's financial,
Right.
on top of whatever other circumstances exist for you, what types of things have you all considered, has your administration considered to ensure that that economic barrier is one that is not there for them?
There are some existing programs, and I think we have the opportunity with a new revenue source to think of others. One that's worked very well for us in kind of the retail space is a very simple program called Great Streets. We look at your space, we figure out how we can outfit it, we figure out with you how it's responding to a community's needs, and we go from there. So there are those types of funds that are available. We also have the opportunity, which we are doing, focusing the government's spend in neighborhoods that need more development. And we have a lot of places that have been developed, have grocery stores, have coffee shops, have you name it, every amenity you can imagine. And then we have other neighborhoods in our city where we're still trying to attract those amenities. So we are using our dollars to, whether it be a lease or some other government use, to put government employees in a neighborhood so that we can generate those amenities. And so we are very focused in my second term on how we really make an impact in neighborhoods to give those neighborhoods the same amenities that we have right here around the E.
As you all consider expanding this industry, hopefully with the help of Congress, which we'll also get to, in your mind, if you could dream big without barriers, what does equity look like?
I think equity, it looks like we have really good DC-based businesses that hire DC residents and that are known nationally for our program. I think it also looks like investing those dollars in the types of things that are going to really help families that have been impacted by the drug war. And I start with housing. And I start with, and I start there, but I think there's still a lot that we need to do with people who want to work, want to be productive, and aren't finding a way to be successful in traditional work. And I think that there's a lot of thinking right now about how we can help those families raise their incomes, start businesses, but get back into productive life in the district.
One thing that I also wanted to ask you about from the standpoint of equity and other kind of revolutionary models you've used to shore up initiatives and kind of your legacy goals as mayor, are there local elected officials that you've modeled your tenure after, especially in the equity space? Like, this is a person who killed it in this city or in this state or, on this city council, and I want to implement some of what they've done.
Well, I think we have a unique set of issues in the district. We and many people will remember the bad old days in the district, where we were losing residents, nobody wanted to locate here, and it was unsafe in our city. Our schools were failing. Those were the bad old days. And we turned our city around with growth. And some people think too rapid growth. And so there are a few cities like ours, but our growth has been supercharged. And how to keep up with that has been my challenge. And I think it will be what we work on and what we've been worked on in housing will be known for. Because we have, unlike any city that I know, dedicated $100 million just in one fund to create more affordable housing. We've set targets for new units that include the number of affordable units. And fighting the tide of growth and gentrification, nobody has mastered, but we have put the type of investment in it that is going to allow us to keep more Washingtonians in Washington.
One person that came to mind on the equity piece, and I don't think they were calling it equity there, but it was Maynard Jackson and the work, of course, he did around the Atlanta airport. Like, when you're actually going to use black businesses, don't talk about our qualifications. We're qualified. We can do this. If you can, pave a driveway, you can pave a runway. And me just thinking about that kind of radical thinking in this approach, because it is so new. And what happens so often in communities of color is by the time our churches, I'm gonna get to the churches next, and other faith communities say it's okay, we miss the boat.
Yes. Yeah. And I think we have, when I became mayor, we were spending like $350 million out of a $14 billion budget on our small and local businesses. And I said, and I'm 5 years in now, and soon, probably by next year, that $350 million will be $1 billion worth of work that I have required to do. Setting a goal, it's not sexy, we set the goals, we announce all the business that we have to do, and we tell everybody, if you want to do business with us, look at this book, because this is what we're buying. And businesses can organize, if they want, to work with us around that work and get that work. But I do think times are different from neighbors, very different.
Yeah.
They're very different.
You have a DC resident here that helps to make it very different.
We
have talking about your president.
Yeah, we have some others too. You know where I'm going with this.
I don't hear about this shade when the lights are off.
Even when I ran for mayor, I told our businesses, there's nothing wrong with favoring small and local businesses at all. It is my priority and my policy to say, I want to work with my businesses before I work with some business out in another community. Because DC businesses hire...
I got the just saddest hand clap. Keep working, and I'm just like, people are like, that is sad. Wake up.
Right, but
y'all enjoy any cannabis and a break? Like, are y'all listening? I'm sorry. We're back. What is in the water? You remember what you were saying? I'm sorry.
No, what was I saying? We were just talking about why it's important
to use your business.
To use our businesses. But the additional point I'm making is we have to fight for that increasingly. Because some people will say, well, you shouldn't use those local programs because they're inferior, or they can't perform, or they cost too much, or we want them to jump through an additional hoop that we didn't require of the majority firms, just because. And if they have even a slightest misstep or late by this, all of the local businesses then are under a cloud.
Yeah.
And that never happens with majority firms.
And see, to me, that's an example of the more things change, the more things stay the same. That is exactly the experience that my dad, who was a federal contractor, had, right? That's the exact experience that I know this is a mixed room, but they're even for ourselves, right? We will say, this black business messed up this one time. I'll never use another black business.
Right.
For real? Like, not even to sell you toothpicks, that was a t-shirt. Like, what exactly is happening? So we have a different standard for us that is unacceptable.
Right.
And clearly a root of slave mentality that needs to go, but I digress.
Yes, but it is for people like me who are sitting in chairs like I'm sitting in think there are more people like me in major cities who are mayor. And I gathered a group of female mayors, I guess it's been a couple of years now, because we had a huge class of black women elected in major cities, Keisha Bottoms, and Contractor, and Charlotte, and now Chicago, San Francisco, all African American women who are leading. And if you look at, if you add up all of our budgets and all of our people, we have an influence over a lot of spending decisions. And over a lot of policies that affect black people and children, and can reverse some of the very negative impacts of over-incarceration in our nation. So, but we do have to be intentional about it, and we do have to support each other, because there's some people that don't want to see those things happen.
Right.
And we have to be intentional about how we get it done.
You mentioned, and speaking of this kind of support, you mentioned at the beginning of our discussion the work that Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton is doing to be supportive. Just like such a champion, like she's like a hero for the ages.
Right.
And so I wanted to know what other members of Congress you're working with on the federal budget provision that's standing in the way of legalization, the way that you see, has the opportunity to revolutionize what's happening in DC for the cannabis industry.
Well, our congresswoman has been amazing, and we control the House now, so that she got the rider removed. I think she got all of them removed on this spending bill. And so now our problem is the Senate. And we don't have senators. And this is why we fight so hard.
Even
for
if you
statehood.
did, that is a hell of a
Even
problem.
if we did, but we would be in the game. And one senator who's offered to be helpful to us in every way before we knew the rider was going to carry through was Senator Booker. And so we will continue to work with Eleanor, who works with the Senate a lot, and our allies in the Senate, and they are numerous.
And so just last week, I'm sure you know, Congress, under the leadership of the first Black and the first woman chair of the Financial Services Committee, Maxine Waters, passed the SAFE Act, which of course,
That's so important.
yes, relieves the federal penalty for banks to service cannabis industry without and from what I hear from friends and folks and advocates in the cannabis industry, it's a double-edged sword, particularly for those who come from underserved communities. It's an important part and pathway to decriminalization, but it also means that big operators now have access to this space and puts the small businesses that you're clearly an advocate for at a disadvantage. Do you see anything else that kind of stands in the way on a federal level? What do you do to ensure that folks who are trying to stand up businesses, especially when it's legalized here, how do you ensure they're safe, that they have a space to operate and to play fairly when the big guys come in?
Well, I think that banking is huge, and I think that the little guys and the big guys can take advantage of banking. It helps them all across the board of being able to pay their employees and being able to sign leases, pay their rent, pay their taxes. Businesses are coming to our tax office with cash. And so just normal business practices suggest that banking is key to all of that. And we like that because we know that people are being paid fairly. And so all of the kind of regulations over doing business are help with banking. We think that a national decrim bill is necessary. Full legalization bill is necessary, so you don't have these differences from state to state. We know people from Maryland and Virginia are in DC. We double our size during the day. They go to doctors here, they get recommendations here, and I just ordered a larger reciprocity bill so that our businesses here can take recommendations from other states. Our medical card that we issue had been a 1-year card, and we're going to double that time, so now it's a 2-year card. So those are some of the things that we're doing to make sure that we have a strong industry going into it.
So the other question I have for you is what this room can do, especially in interfacing with Congress. I saw a picture, a protest that's supposed to happen next week, and it says Congress passed the joint on a 50-foot joint. You get it? Congress passed the joint. Okay. Y'all get it tomorrow. I am confident that there was a break that I missed and some things happened. I'm just like, it's a day's happening. Y'all stay with me. But what can this room do to ensure that they're being supportive of the things you're trying to get past, the support you need to ensure that legalization isn't just real for personal possession, but also for an industry?
Well, I think that we need to identify, and that's where we can use our big business partners. I want to thank Pepco and Exelon for being a sponsor here, but there are others who are in the room and who are national. See, the thing about getting things done in DC, I don't usually promote this, but when we get it right in DC, it's a model for the nation. And so I think that everybody nationally interested in cannabis should be interested in having the DC rider removed. Congress is here, the president is here, and this is, getting this right is good for us, but it's also good for everybody. So I have found that the members of Congress listened to their business supporters, and identifying who they are in this space is helpful.
I talked, just like with a little bit of shade momentarily, about the role of the faith community. And so often this is, I think, something that cannabis specifically is a taboo to a lot of folks in the faith community. What can the faith community do? Especially in an issue that for some is just uncomfortable because they just avoid talking about it.
Right. Well, I will say one thing about this room, because usually when I talk about marijuana, everybody's laughing and giggling. Like, nobody can talk about marijuana without like a little bit of a chuckle. And so I think that we just have to be clear about why we are doing it. And we're not doing it for the money. We're doing it for safety, and we're doing it to keep from locking people up, just for something so minor. So I think that is important to talk to faith communities about. I think it's also important to talk to people who have concerns about marijuana, about how we deal with children and marijuana, okay? Nothing that we're proposing is for children, it's for adults. And we have to make sure that we're talking about how we're educating children about marijuana use. We don't want our children using marijuana. Their brains aren't finished developing. Marijuana is not good for them, and we don't want them using it. And when we have children who are using marijuana, we want to make sure that we have behavioral health programs that are there to support them. The other issue that we have when we deal with is people not wanting to be bothered by somebody else's marijuana use. And you're on a municipal, you see what I'm saying? So I'm a mayor, I've been a council member, and people don't want to smell marijuana if they don't use marijuana. So how
You want to smell it, Mayor?
I
told y'all I was gonna get her again.
I don't want to smell it necessarily if I'm going in a public park. I don't want to smell it on my front porch necessarily. I mean, these are real things that I deal with. Look, I'm going to an ANC meeting tonight. So somebody, not so much lately, I will say, because I think the more that we have educated our communities, that neighbors, they could say the same thing about cigarette smoke. They could say the same thing about drinking on the front porch, which they do. So these are types of things that we have to deal with. But when I encounter skeptics, it's largely to do with they do look down on marijuana use, and we have to kind of deal with it, saying that adults can choose to use it, just like they choose to use alcohol. And guess what? They're already using it. So how can we regulate it to make it safe? How do we deal with the issue of children? And how do we deal with that kind of neighbor to neighbor issue of getting along that we have to deal with a lot of issues?
Well, I look forward to you not being our generation's Maynard Jackson, but to being our generation's Muriel
Thank
Bowser
you.
on this issue.
Thank
I
you.
look forward to
Thank you.